It's great to see everyone here tonight. We're really excited to chat to our guests. So first we have Harry Sekulich, is that right? Perfect. Who is currently a reporter at the Daily Oz. He's also worked at the ABC, where he presented Triple J News and has covered a variety of international and domestic stories. He specialises in politics, climate, international affairs and court reporting.
And here we have Quinn. She's currently producer with ABC Radio National and a reporter for 10 News First in Sydney. She's also the host of the weekly radio program and podcast Fourth Estate, which is produced through 2SER. So to start off, Harry, the Daily Oz has been this great new innovation in news for young people. What is it like working for the Daily Oz, and what's kind of like the dynamics?
Well, thanks for having me, everyone. So good to see you all. As you'll know, like, the Daily Oz is just such an awesome tool for young people to get across what's happening in the news. So it's really just trying to get media literacy built for younger audiences rather than just kind of assuming knowledge and having the same sort of style of, catastrophic headline after catastrophic headline. Sorry, if that's calling a bit, I do apologise. It's very much distinct from the ABC in many ways. First of all, we're a team of about 16 people. The ABC hires, I think, more than 2,200 people, so you immediately go into a smaller team where you're meant to have a bit more dexterity. But the approach to news is just so different in the way that we invert the inverted pyramid, because we put context first, we go into explaining things that seem blatantly obvious. You take a word like inflation and then all of a sudden you're putting into brackets rising prices or affidavit, personal statement, audit, review, because those are just kind of jargony words that your average 18-year-old that's on their way to uni is just not really going to know off the cuff. But I'm so excited about what they're doing in news, because social media should be for everyone, and it is for everyone. It's a universal tool, so we know there's a lot of misinformation out there. We know a lot of people use it for nefarious reasons. Somewhere like the Daily Oz is really good at bridging that gap and being able to intercept people where they are, and also just maybe bring them something that's kind of sensible and grounded in fact. Make it as sexy as possible as well.
And Tina, what's it like working at the ABC and Network 10, and what are some of the differences between the two?
Thanks, sorry guys if that's popping a little bit. Thanks for having me, everyone. Well, look, obviously they're, one's a public broadcaster and one's a commercial broadcaster. I am freelance at the moment, so I'm able to work across both, which is really good fun. Well, the ABC obviously has a very different charter to a lot of commercial news organisations. I guess one of the most obvious things, though, as well as at 10, is very much focused on their visual video output, so traditional broadcast, and of course they're trying to become much more flexible with what's happening, with the whole change in the way that we are consuming content and consuming news. And I get really loud all of a sudden. Sorry. So you've got this traditional form of television broadcast, whereas the ABC, because of its charter and the fact that it needs to be kind of everything to everyone in a sense, works across all three different mediums, which is really exciting. So you've got radio, you've got digital, and you've got television. And radio, I should say audio. We're actually kind of smacked a little bit when we say radio, because we're all supposed to be part of audio now, because audio is the future, and it is true. I think traditional radio will remain, and the way we traditionally broadcast will remain, but we do need to become a lot more flexible when it comes to how we put out our content, because I think audio on demand is definitely the way of the future. It's very clear when we look at listening habits and the way it's all heading. So, is there another part of that question?
No.
No? Did I answer all of it? Great. All right.
I'll hand that back.
So, Harry, we'll start with you on this one. What inspired you to pursue a career in journalism?
Dropping out of law school. Probably no lie there. No, I was always that friend. I finished high school in 2015. 2016 was my first year of uni. It was just kind of, getting into the ropes of things. Hated law school, dropped out. And then there was also this big US election going on. And out of my friends, I was that person that was just sharing stuff constantly, being like, can you believe what Trump just said? Or like, oh, the campaign for Hillary Clinton's going really bad. And that's probably what solidified over time. It did take a little while. Like, I was a bit, in the throes of thinking like, gee, what am I going to do? Am I just going to drop out of uni altogether? But then, just found out I had a knack for gossiping as well, and news. So it was, the natural path, I guess. But yeah, that's, I guess, like, journalists are such weird creatures in that way, because like, we are so curious about what is going on in the world, and we want to make sense of it ourselves, but more than that, we want to make sure that we can go to the pub and we can explain those things to other people, because that's the art of it. And I just found every time I go out with my friends, I want to be that person that was sort of across what was happening, and not to be like, too much of a wanker about it, but I just wanted to always be, ahead of that kind of conversation. And then, just love talking to people as well, getting to know their stories, and being able to, just find people who often you would think like won't want to talk about something really personal that's happened to them, or something that's really, tricky to discuss. But often when you carve out that space for someone to talk, you would just find the most incredible stories, and people just like, it's really true, like everybody has their own story to tell, and I just think that's like just so awesome. And I used to see like journalists on TV and think they've got the coolest job in the world, like I want to do that. So I guess it was fairly natural for me. After a while I was like, I'll stop giving my parents a heart attack about what I'm going to do, and I'll just stick to one thing.
And you, Tim?
So why did I get into journalism? Well, I did a couple of different things before I got into journalism. It had been something that had always, I think, been at the back of my mind even growing up. The news was always on in my house. There was always a lot of discussion and ideas talked about at the dinner table. Can everybody, is that all right? Is that coming through okay? There was always a lot of discussion and ideas at the dinner table at my house, and a lot of debate about things and issues, and so that was just always a really big part of my life. And combined with that, with I guess storytelling, and I think storytelling goes across different. It can run along a lot of different sort of outlets in a sense. It can be through film, it can be through music, it can be through books, it can be through newspapers. And I was always really attracted to all sorts of different forms of storytelling. But I went in and was doing a lot of different things. At first, out of school, I ended up getting into public relations and media, and I was a book publicist for a while for Penguin Random House and Allen & Unwin, and I was working a lot with all these like big authors, and I was having to pitch a lot to journalists and work with them, and just being around it more and more made me go, actually, I think this is what I really want to do with my life. And I was actually in my late 20s when I made that call. Am I a bit too old to do this? Like, it's, 27, I shouldn't be, throwing it all out now and blah, 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 which is complete rubbish. So, but I took the leap and did it. And I have to say, the 2016 election really influenced me as well, because a few years before I did make the change, I was getting really frustrated with a lot of the coverage that I was seeing of it. And the way things were being reported, and I thought some of the reporting was really irresponsible and led to the result that we saw. And I remember really getting up. Yeah, would you? Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that's probably, we're always told don't lie.
Yeah.
And don't, embellish, or don't, exaggerate to a point that of an absurdity, and all of a sudden there was this person getting elected in the most powerful country in the world. And I think, yeah, in a similar way, like, you know, without getting too activist about it, like, I was just so shocked at what was happening. But then, you know, I was looking at the news coverage and it was like leading with Trump's tweets constantly. His comments were the top line. And often, like, a world leader's comments will sort of, you know, hit the top of the bulletin, but, you know, these were just really, really absurd and outrageous remarks, and I just couldn't quite believe that that was happening. So yeah, no.
I think it was the way I at least, you know, as you said, without getting too activist, I felt the way that the sort of credit that was being given to him, the legitimising of him in a way that I thought was really dangerous. And then when I looked at his opponent, the way she was being covered, I thought was ridiculous. I just thought it was, I couldn't, you know, I didn't think a lot of it was based in reality, and I felt like there was so much of trying to, I guess, find things about the other candidate to try and criticise, because there was so much about Trump, yet there wasn't as much hate given on Trump because he was sort of the clown. And then with Clinton, you know, it was just such a weird, the whole thing was so strange. It was like sort of being in some weird fun house, and it really frustrated me because I thought this is a really important event, and I think I felt the media was largely being really irresponsible in the way they were covering it. So that kind of, that really put it to front of mind for quite a while before I took the job. So that was a really long response, sorry guys.
It's alright, yeah. So leading on from that, so how did you go from those early starts of your career to now in audio and podcasting?
Yeah, in terms of my trajectory, I started out as an intern at the ABC when I was doing my masters. Just kind of got it by a good combination of time and opportunity. We were in one of those brief periods of not lockdown in Melbourne, and they hadn't seen a fresh face for a long time, and so they were like, we need someone very junior reporter to just do like the radio shift in the evenings, which was about as bottom rung as it gets, but I was willing to do it. I was in my final year of uni. It was just like such a good opportunity, and ended up staying there for about a year, and then went into news radio, so was doing like, you know, syndicated content and news bulletin content for the radio news services at the ABC. Then moved into Triple J for about 2 months. I was the Liz Truss of Triple J. I lasted 2 months, left voluntarily as well, and started at the Daily, was because I started at the Daily Oz, where I got into podcasting, and I'd gone from a style of audio that was very, you know, succinct, and brevity was rewarded, and, you know, all of a sudden went into a realm where I was given 15 minutes to have a conversation about one particular topic. And it was like, you know, kid in a candy store. I couldn't quite believe I had so long. I had more than 30 seconds in the bulletin. And so, yeah, it's just been so much fun being able to experiment with that longer form of podcasting. And I just think, you know, podcast is such an accessible format. It's for people who are on the commute, it's for people on the go. And the Daily Oz just does such a good job of, you know, being that friend in your ears. And yeah, that's probably nothing.
And Tina, you have a series that you work on called The Fourth Estate. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Fourth Estate predates me by a long time, by association with 2SEL by a long time. So it's been going, nobody's still been able to give me an actual year number that it started, but well over 20 years now. And it's a program, I don't know if many of you listen to it here, but it's a program where we speak to and we hear from other journalists about, usually it's a panel show, so we might have 2 or 3 journos on, we discuss an issue of the week that's in the news affecting the media, the way it's been covered, or stuff like that. But I've also been breaking it up with some in conversations and profiles with journalists who've had really amazing careers and hearing from them, sort of doing longer form conversations, just one-on-one with them about their life and career. But it predated me. It's got an amazing history of hosts before me. So people like Peter Frame, who was editor-in-chief of the Sydney Morning Herald, and then later Crikey. Monica Attard, who used to be the ABC's Russia correspondent, who's probably maybe a lecturer of some of yours, because she teaches at UTS, I believe. So so it's had an amazing history of hosts, and I got involved with it probably in late 2020 when I started working at 2SER, and it was a real, I really loved Fourth Estate. I thought it was a great program, and I had this idea. It was right at the end of 2020 when the US election was on, and I had this idea. I wanted to hear from this amazing photojournalist who worked for the New York Times that had taken some really, I just saw really stunning photographs that really had spoken to me throughout the last few election cycles, and I thought it would be really interesting. And he'd also covered lots of different things like the COVID-19 pandemic all through New York, and the opioid crisis across America, and had just taken, looking at his photographs, it just really it took my breath away sometimes. They really told such a story, and they told such heartache in a lot of his work. And I just thought, we don't hear from photojournalists enough, so I pitched it to the MP of Fourth Estate. I said, what if we had him on for any conversation? And again, I'd never worked on the program before, and they went, if you can get him, and I did, and he said, great, let's do the interview for Fourth Estate. And that sort of began my association with it, because Monica Attard was sort of winding back her hosting responsibilities with it, so they took me on and asked me to start hosting it full time. And I did that until the end of 2022, and then I took a role as a reporter with the ABC up in the Mid-North Coast and the region. So I left Sydney for well over a year, and then I came back this year, and they very nicely asked me to come back again. So it's been really good fun, because I just think it's such interesting conversations that I get to have each week with other people that are in this industry. And it can be a bit navel gazing a little bit, because we all like to talk. We find that journalists really like to talk shop with each other. So it's definitely a show for journos. But I do, look, I do hear from people that aren't working in the media that also find it interesting because of the media literacy that it provides them. And I think media literacy is a really, really important thing in this day and age. And I think the Daily Oz actually does some really good work around this as well when it comes to media literacy and helping people understand why they're seeing something reported in the way that they are, and the language that's used, and the reasons for that. I think that's, I think it's really crucial, and I think that we have a much more stronger, robust media and electorate as a result. We were all much more media literate, because it's kind of, it's the public's role to really hold media to account on how they're, really providing this information and how they're putting it out there, how they're communicating the news to people. So if we're really passive and submissive and kind of go, all right, well, that's not great, or, that language is really unfortunate that they've used, or they're not really giving much context or depth to this issue, and it's making it seem, it's colouring it in a way that, is not great. If we sort of let that happen, then it's just going to continue. I think the quality of media coverage is going to continue to decline. So I think the more of us that are really informed and are really literate about media and the way it works and how the sausage is made, the more likely we are to be able to hold big media organisations to account and really just kind of, I guess, drive standards up a bit better.
So just going on from that and talking about media literacy and like a wide range of media, how would an episode of Fourth Estate different from you producing for the ABC radio? So like different topics, and like different, but maybe you wrote it differently in the different conversational styles? How would that differ?
So, I mean, the producing work that I've done for ABC Radio is I do, so the ABC's a bit confusing. They've got all these, I actually started at news radio as well, so it's a good breeding ground for a lot of people. They've got a few different radio frequencies, so, you know, you've got news radio, you've got every cap city's got local radio, and then what we call local radio. So here in Sydney it's called ABC Radio Sydney 702, and then you've got ABC Radio National as well, which is their national radio network. And ABC Radio National, when I'm producing, because I do a bit of producing for both local and Radio National, and there is a bit of a tonal shift between them. Radio National has always been considered the intelligentsia of the ABC, and it's a very intellectual network, and you know, it definitely invites, you know, for more longer form, whereas local radio, while not quite nowhere, historically it shared a lot more similarities to FM formats in a lot of ways. It's still markedly different from it now. And there's a lot more interviews that you'll hear. It's a lot more interview driven, of course, than most FM stations are, and less music. But the interviews are shorter than Radio National. So, but I guess at the end of the day, like, you know, when I'm producing for those programs, you know, I'm sometimes having to produce 1 or 2 interviews, or sometimes 3, especially in local radio. Sometimes 3 interviews for a program each day. Whereas Fourth Estate is very different because it's a once a week program, and I mean I have to sort of do audit, so I research it, I get the guests in, I have to secure the talent. It's pre-recorded, so I'm not really producing for live radio, but you know, we do have a deadline because it goes to air at 6:30 on a Thursday night, and then it's podcasted. So I would just say it's very holistic before the start, like, because I have to do everything from the back end to the front end to, you know, making sure it gets out there, and I get to really sink my teeth into a subject. Whereas with ABC, you know, working at ABC Radio, you have to move on quickly. You're churning through interviews. You might produce 5, 6, 7 questions for this guest, great, and then, you know, move on. But some presenters like, because we're producing these interviews for other people to do on air. So other presenters really like backgrounders. So you have to give you have to give them a lot of notes so they can sort of get across the issue, and which, you know, you might have already talked about them with them in an editorial meeting. But it's just it differs for sure. And did you ask about tone? Is there a tonal shift?
Yeah, just the kind of tone differences between radio and podcasting in general, almost.
Well, I mean, Fourth Estate, I still, you know, keep in mind that it is a radio program, and I think with Fourth Estate we just get to take our time on an issue a little bit more, so it's not as boom, boom, boom kind of thing. So, and that is the beauty of audio and podcasting, is that you can, and what you just highlighted as well, you can really take your time. So, yeah.
And Harry, can you tell us a little bit about working on the Daily Oz podcast, and what does a day in the office recording look like for you? So what's your involvement in producing, and how does that all work?
Yeah, it's chaos. It's so, to echo exactly what Tina was saying, with radio, you're up against a deadline, you know, at the top of the hour, the bottom of the hour. You really just don't have much time to get, you know, news content out. And when you are speaking for news radio, you have to have sort of a sense of authority, but they also want you to sound conversational, and so you get into this weird mix of like, oh, they're putting it on a little bit too much, you know, my old manager telling me that, versus like, you know, is this a warm, friendly voice that you can trust? And I think the Daily Oz encourages that, but they, you know, the beauty of it is, you know, you can only really be yourself. Sorry to sound like an inspirational, motivational speaker, but that's kind of like where the beauty of the Daily Oz lies, in the sense that you are just talking to a friend and you're telling them what's going on in the world. In terms of what it looks like in a typical day, so we have our pitch meeting at 9 o'clock. We sort of go through like all the stories we put forward, and then Zara, like one of the co-founders of the Daily Oz, she'll sort of say, all right, yep, I like that for a podcast. Can you just turn around a feed posting a podcast by 1 o'clock, and then we'll record at 1. And some days it's pretty easy because you've got the groundwork laid, but some days when you're just doing research from scratch, it can be, madness. But yeah, so I do a lot of scripting, and then I get into the booth with Zara, and we typically have a script format to work off, but we go off script all the time, and what ends up getting recorded is probably like 80% impromptu and just ad-libbing, and then 20% what we've actually planned to say. But that's not deviating from the facts, not deviating from the information that we already do have. It's just the whole idea is that it's meant to be very casual, it's meant to be very fluid and easy to listen to. And then we've got a podcast / video producer at the moment who does a lot of the fill-ins for grabs and checking out levels, which is a term that I learned very quickly at the ABC, because you also, when you're a journalist there and working in audio, you also have to check your own levels, you have to check your own audio, you have to make sure there's no pops, because it's just all you, whereas thankfully I've got a really awesome podcast producer, Orla, at Daily Oz, and so that we also, in a very traditional style, try to get a bit of atmos, try to get some more grabs from Talman, or we love a voice note as well from our audience. Like, we're so hot for it. Like, that's just what makes the story that much better, when we've actually got people who are like sending through their own stories and sending through their own experiences, and we can like listen to that and have like a real-time reaction, being like, oh my goodness, like this is huge, whatever development it is. We're just discussing, some of the scandals in hospitality recently. We had some people sending through their voice notes about like what they had been through anonymously. And the Sam and Zara were listening to it in real time, and we were capturing their reaction, and they were just saying like, this is something so many people can relate to. So that's sort of covers off the process, I guess.
So, how do you think these podcasts actually complement like the Daily Oz's style and stories?
Yeah, so we don't tend to do much for the podcast that isn't already on our feed. We might take an interview with a guest, so we had Dylan Alcott this week. We had Lee Sales a few weeks ago. She just casually strutted into the newsroom and we're all meant to just not freak out. So we do those, sit-down interviews, and I think there's some of our better episodes. In terms of style, I tend to write in a way that's very audio, very much to the ear and very much audio friendly, because I've just gotten so used to it over the years at the ABC. And so when I go to write a digital story or a feed post, sometimes I'll be told, you're writing for audio because you're using this means that. And I'm thinking, but that just makes sense. Like, that's how I would say it. And it's like, the digital, the format's slightly different. You can afford to take a break and then reintroduce an idea or whatever. I think the audio's very much is meant to speak to what is already sort of out there for us. We're becoming adapted. You're going to hear the term multi-platform a lot. I think we try to, keep the tone consistent, but keep churning out content across all platforms, I suppose.
And what are some of the unique ways that audio journalists engage with their audiences to suit the platform compared to the way you would for
written story. You can both speak to that one.
So what are some of the ways that they
Are engaging with their audiences. So getting them to interact with the medium that they consume.
I think, look, it's interesting that, what you just said about, having voice notes from people as well. I think that really does make, for an audio story, for an audio feature story, I mean, that's what really makes it. You don't want to just hear me or Harry sort of babbling on about the issue for 4 minutes and just hear our voices. You want to hear other voices. And it's going to engage the listener a lot more. And, usually there'll be, there might be one person, one or two people in there that one of the listeners is going to go, I can relate to what they're saying, or I can, because you're also bringing real people along to help tell you the story that have experience as well. It creates a greater sense of empathy. I mean, it's really what storytelling and journalism is really all about, is relating that news to people. But I think news should strike some sort of sense of empathy with people. Like it should make them go and think about the issue from a deeper level, and how it puts them in someone else's shoes in a sense. But I think making it really, the audio really dynamic. So when you said, having lots of atmos as well, so atmos, atmosphere. I used to love, when I was working in the regions, I used to love recording sounds of like birds chirping or something when I was out. I might be out speaking to a farmer, or I was reporting on some issue, and sometimes it would be great to just open my story with sort of bringing listeners to the actual location. So it could be birds chirping, or you hear this babbling brook, or maybe it was on this, this big accident that happened on a highway, and it's, the sounds of the highway, or maybe it's the sounds of the animals on a farm, or anything. It's just something to really bring the listener there and really engage with the story, because I think audio is such a powerful form of storytelling out of all the mediums. I think it's so wonderful. I think it's so creative. There's so many things that you can do, but you do have to write and produce for it a little bit differently, because you're trying to conjure up a picture in people's imaginations, and you're trying to really get them to listen, because if they're reading it off the page, they can conjure up an image in their imagination. If they miss something, they can sort of go back and read it. With audio they can't, it's very of the moment. Although you can now, since it's on demand. But you really want to engage them with what the sort of audio content that you're putting out there, and you want to really bring them there. And I think it's really about painting a picture in their head through audio storytelling. So
Yeah, so going on from that, and with the power of audio, would you say there's like a lot more intimacy with audio as well compared to any other stories, like feeling like you're in the conversation?
Yeah, and some of the best audio presenters or radio presenters are those people that feel like they're in your lounge room with you. So Fran Kelly, for me, growing up, was that person, because she's just got such a warm voice, and she just Fran's just fantastic, and I think that's because as a presenter or someone who's behind the mic just needs to remember they're talking to a real person, and they're talking to someone who, whether they have a depth of knowledge on a particular area, they're an expert in the field, versus someone who has just never heard of what you're talking about before. The experience is still the same. You're in their car, you're in their lounge room, you're in their ears, their headphones. I just had a very tangential thought to what Tina was saying just then. It's like taking the audience to a particular location is just so powerful. And I just remember there was this story on AM a few years ago. It was, I can't quite remember, I think it was actually about a protest, and it cuts away to the story from the intro. And the first thing you hear is someone sneezing. And I thought oh God, they've got the wrong audio, or they've just got they haven't done a proper edit. And then the overlay of the reporter's voice comes through, and it's like, you don't need to tell Margie that spring has sprung. And she's like, oh, my hay fever's so bad. And it was just like, you know, we're all there, we're all outdoors, like, you know, straight away just imagining someone just sneezing their life out because, you know, the pollen is pollinating. So yeah, I just think it's such a powerful tool to be able to do that. And yeah, it's just kind of having that command of, you know, going back to how the Daily Oz does things. It's just trying to be a friend. We sort of relate who we are to just those early experiences. I'm sure everyone's been there when, you know, you've gone from school to uni, you're trying to navigate campus for the first time. You're completely lost, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you are. And the Daily Oz is sort of meant to be that friend that comes along and being like, hey, this is where we go. Or this, like, you know, explaining like, that's where you get lunch, that's where the bathrooms are, like, you know, to put it into a, you know, terrible metaphor. That's kind of what we do, and we try to do that in audio as well.
And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but from an editorial standpoint, are there certain stories that when they're in front of you, you think are better suited for audio production? And how do you kind of make those decisions about whether or not they're the right fit?
Do you want to go?
You go.
So I think just being able to hear the quiver in someone's voice, or you know, the jubilation in someone is so hard to convey on the page. There are times where, like, I've done a really cracking interview for a story that will go out onto our feed, and it comes along to the title, and I'm writing it up being like, you know, Jason was, you know, so keen to, you know, start his new apprenticeship or whatever. Then I'll have a quote or two from him. But then I sort of look at it and I'm like, it's just really not doing justice to this guy who has just like told me like some of the most like exciting moments of his life. Or I spoke to Anjali Sharma, who's she's the Climate Change Duty of Care campaigner. And she's been advocating for the government to introduce a duty of care legislation for all climate-related decisions. And she got knocked back. David Pocock, the independent senator, introduced this legislation, went through a whole committee process. Angela Sharma and a lot of other students, you know, appeared at these committees and had gone through months and months of negotiations just trying to get this bill right. And the government was, you know, coming to the table and talking to them for ages and ages, and then all of a sudden they just dropped the committee report where they said, yeah, we believe that it's not exactly the right direction for the country to go in. And so I spoke to Anjali not long after the report was dropped, and, you know, she's a professional. She expected, you know, the worst. But, you know, just hearing the way that she was talking about it, it was just so inspiring, like her sense of passion and her sense of just, you know, wanting to do something that isn't like a, you know, nailing her colours to the mast. It's just like she's thinking about the next generation. She's thinking about people beyond herself who would need this legislation. And to hear that in her voice, I just remember interviewing her and saying, guys, I think we really need her for the podcast. She's just like, she's incredible talent, but she's also just so full of passion and feeling for what she does that you just can't replicate that with everybody. Some people will, you know, we go to NGOs all the time, we go to politicians all the time for, you know, a comment, and, you know, some of them, you know, it's better left on the page, I think. Like, they're not going to be particularly exciting, they're not going to spark any feelings out of you. But it's important to get their voice in there. But yeah, I just think being able to, yeah, capture someone's actual sense of emotion for whatever it might be, I think is poorly replicated everywhere but audio.
Tina, do you have any examples of this maybe in live radio as well, particularly with not being able to go back and edit it?
Yeah, and look, I would just add to, with that, I mean, because having worked across television as well, I mean, the thing, see, sometimes audio can be so freeing, and as you said, like sometimes it's hearing the quiver in someone's voice, or I remember doing bushfire coverage, and I thought the most powerful work I did during that time, and speaking to farmers who'd lost neighbours and people that had been killed, was on the ground there when I went to spoke to one of the neighbours, and I recorded that conversation and filed it for one of our programs later on. I also had to write it up for a digital story, and it was just so much more powerful because this farmer was trying to be really strong and really, he was kind of, he was from really tough stock and had a beautiful voice for radio, like a real deep timbre to his voice, but he was a very sort of plainly spoken person, and it didn't transmit as well to the digital story, just reading his words, but when you listen to him talking, I mean, people were coming up to me going, it brought tears to my eyes hearing him talk about losing his neighbour and friend. You could hear his voice choke up. And I was also there trying to set the scene, letting people know that, there's smoke arising from trees still, there's, a lot of this place is really burnt out. And so it's really freeing in that sense. And then you've got on the other side, which is television. If you don't have the right imagery, I mean, a TV story really hinges on that. Have you got the right imagery to tell this story? And I just think audio can be really freeing in that sense, because look, sometimes you'll still have shit talent and it'll be really hard to get an audio story up. But I mean, a lot of the time I just think it's one of the most creative mediums, and it's one of the it's possibly my favourite medium of journalism for that reason. I mean, I love television, I love telling stories with pictures as well, but I do think there's a lot you can do with radio and audio that you can't in other areas. And you were asking about live radio, the difference between not being able to go back.
Just maybe like the immediacy of it and not being able to go back and edit it.
Oh man, let me tell you, I had to host a live radio program for the ABC when I was in the regions called The Rural Report. I was on at 6:15 in the morning. I don't know whose idea it was to call a program that with that many R's, where you'd have to introduce at 6:15 in the morning, Tina Quinn with The Rural Report. And I've never been very good at saying R's, and I remember saying to my partner at the time, going, just really, like, when I took the job, I'm like, I can't really say rural. Like, I'm not really good at saying, like, I was convinced the first month I'm going to come on air and say, this is Tina Quinn with The Rural Report. And, like, I was petrified. And there were so many gaps. Like, there's a whole blooper reel worth of stuff that I did, because when you're working in the regions, you do everything yourself. There are no audio technicians in the studio with you. You're putting yourself to air at that time of the morning. Anything can go wrong, and it did. And sometimes you just go, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And the Rural Report consisted of other reporters finding stories for you. So there's usually about 3 stories. It's sort of like an AM for the regions. And it was a 15-minute program, so you'd have 3 stories. I'd introduce the program and then introduce the story. And you'd go to the little audio package, and then you'd come out of that, and I'd have to do the next one and that. And I would do 1 week on, 1 week off. So 1 week on I was hosting, and then the other week I was in the field reporting, filing these stories for the host who was sitting in the chair. And but then some mornings, especially on big issues, I would line interviews to do, sometimes with politicians or regulators, or again at that time of the morning, so you've got to make sure you're really prepped. You've got to make sure all the actual journalistic work is really like nailed to a fine note, because you've then got all this tech stuff to worry about, and that was always really nerve-wracking, having to broadcast live to the region at that time of morning, doing live interviews. And weirdly enough, they were usually the times where things went pretty well, like there were limited gaps maybe, I guess you'd say, maybe because you were so, you dotted every I and crossed every T beforehand to go, this has got to get off. But live radio, I do think it's very addictive, it's very special, and it's a great skill to have. And having been someone that's done a lot of live, going into pre-recording can be, I found my love for it again, but it can be a pain in the ass because you can really overthink in pre-recording because you want to nail it and you think, I'll just do another take, or I'll just do another, And so wanting to do things, so I find with say For the State, I just try and do that as live, and you can edit out things here and there, but you don't want to you want to do it like it's a live radio interview because it can take a lot of the magic out of it, whereas when you're doing these conversations live, there's just a lot of sort of spontaneity and but you have to let go as well because not everything is going to be perfect. There are going to be gaps, but you've got to find beauty in those gaps because sometimes they're actually more interesting. Just when things go wrong or something that's not perfect, sometimes they're way more interesting.
Yeah, well, doing Triple J news reading was, an experience into and of itself. I definitely don't have as much live experience as Tina does, but one day all my audio was just completely out of order. So what I was reading compared to what was playing for the grads, I was like, oh no, nothing. It's all just completely shaken up. So I just, was playing audio that was the wrong grab. It was Barnaby Joyce when it was meant to be Anthony Albanese and all kinds of things. And, you're on air and you're just thinking, gosh, what do I do now? There's a great skill called padding where you just have to talk.
Extemporizing.
Yeah. It's just filling that space. For news, I think, you need to obviously stick to what's happened, what's current, and what do we know. So you are sort of a bit more narrow in your bandwidth, but it's just being able to work with that is just such a good skill and only really comes with experience. And I'm only talking about very limited experience here, but I've just found it's helped because often you'll get 20 minutes with someone, if that, 15 minutes to do a big interview. Tomorrow I've got one with someone who is the co-chair of the Uluru Dialogue, given that it's going to be a year since The Voice. And, I've only got 15 minutes, but I've sort of, got myself into the train of thought of being like, I know what I need to cover. If something goes wrong, I'll steer us back. And just sort of knowing what direction you want to go in is all that can really guide you in those moments. I've had some interviewees, politicians, who, will squander that 15 minutes as much as they can. And you've just got to kind of have that knack of just, let's go back to what I actually want to ask you, what people who are reading this are going to want to know. I don't want to know all your, I don't want to know all your talking points against the opposition for the day. I need to know, how is this particular policy going to affect my life?
Actually, if we have time, can I tell my favourite live radio gaffe story?
I was about to ask you that anyway.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I bet you
Read my mind.
No, I just thought of it and I'm like, maybe this, I think it's quite funny. It made a lot of people I worked with laugh. I was horrified at the time. When I first took over the rural report, and so I was working in the Mid-North Coast out of Port Macquarie, and this program broadcast to the whole Mid-North Coast region, so everywhere from Bulladilla up to Grafton. But this was during the Christmas holidays, so a lot of people are down. So we've got a lot of people down. So the ABC does what we call networking. So we just start doing statewide programs. So because each region had its own rural report, so I had to broadcast to all of New South Wales, bar Sydney, because this program's not on in Sydney. And anyways, I was really fresh. I had only started a month before, and they're getting me to broadcast the whole state over the Christmas holidays. And I went in and thought everything's organised, everything's good, okay, great. All my scripts are perfect. I was, went into the studio, and there was a setting on the computer that a previous presenter had left that I wasn't familiar with, and I could not find all of my audio stories, all of my what we call cart stack, and they were nowhere to be found. And we only had a few minutes to air, and there was nobody in the studio with me at the time. Nobody was there. I was the only one there, so nobody could help me. I'm trying to ring people and wake them up, and go, what's going on? Why is, what's happening? And finally, I couldn't even find the theme music to the program. And finally, the program we're supposed to go on at 6:15. We come on right after early AM with Sabra Lane. And the first thing that, the last thing that she says is, that's early AM, I'm Sabra Lane. It's 6:15. And then my program's supposed to come on. And I'm just sitting there freaking out and dead air. Because I'm just going, I've got nothing to play, I've got nothing to say. So it's just dead air. And I would have handled it a bit differently now. But the ABC has this thing where, because dead air is the worst thing you can have. I think after about 12 seconds, this like automatic, they start taking from another region, they start taking from another place. Or they hook onto the previous audio. It's got this weird looping thing where it'll hook onto the last bit of audio in her broadcast, and it'll just keep playing it on a loop. So the last thing it heard was Sabra Lane saying it's 6:15, but it really cut off only the last 2 seconds. So instead of 6:15, it was 6, but it cut it off at a weird point, and it sounded like she was saying dicks. Like it really sounded like there was a D there, and she was saying dicks, like for at least a minute, and I've got it later on. It was, and I'm in there having a complete panic attack. I'm just hearing dicks being broadcast to the whole state, and thinking that I was going to be fired. So I wasn't, but yeah. My favourite story. Dicks to New South Wales.
Well, we actually do have a question to ask you about the technology that you use. So in that situation, what were some learning curves that you guys went through? Did you kind of have to learn as you go? Are you still learning? And what are some of the challenges with it? You kind of already said.
Yeah, well, I mean, live radio, anything can and will go wrong. But yeah, I mean, look, I would handle that probably differently now. Like I would, but then again, all it took was me becoming more and more across the tech. They probably kind of threw me in the deep end a little bit, to be honest, which happens when you're in the regions. And yeah, I think you're constantly evolving when it comes to tech and learning new things and different. You go to different places and you'll be using different hardware and different equipment, and it's just getting. I feel like once you've got the basics down, and once you work out how to use a panel, which is what we call a studio, and again, look, every panel is different, but they all sort of have the same kind of basis in a sense. I don't know what do you find that at the Daily Oz, like?
Well, yeah, no one lets
because you've done, compared to the ABC and Triple J.
Thankfully, nobody lets me anywhere near the panels at the Daily Oz. Probably saw my Triple J experience.
So you've got tech guys, right?
We've got a tech person. We're a small team. That at the ABC, when I was doing news reading, they've got what's called fader. And so you can either opt to play your grab or fade into the grab or fade out of it, or you've got your sting at the top of the hour, and I thought I was never a DJ or anything, but I was like, oh, it kind of looks pretty cool, I want to do it just for my one time. And I was like, oh, how bad can it be? Just give it a subtle little downward spiral. And it did spiral because the top of the hour came, played the sting, and then I thought it was just going to be a smooth little fade out, but my finger decided to go straight down, so it was really jarring to listen to. And then I was like, Harry Sekulich for Triple J News. you have to go with it. I always think of Tony Armstrong. I think he's been such a great influence on the media and news more generally for a multitude of reasons, but I think his greatest one is that he sees his role as, I'm going to stuff up all the time. I'm going to probably mess this up. And that's like his attitude going into it, but you just lean into it. And you just kind of got to do what you know. If you need help, just ask. Sometimes, I imagine in the regions, it's, you don't have that luxury of just going to ask someone you know, who just might be around. You know, I haven't quite found myself in that actually no, I have found myself in that situation where it's, you know, you're the last person in the studio and, you know, the cart stack is not working as it's meant to be, and so, as I mentioned before, you get Barnaby Joyce playing when you're meant to have Anthony Albanese, you think, oh, now that sounds a bit different today.
You know, like even sort of, you get like even, like you hear some of the most experienced newsreaders, like Helen Zaremas, who was, you know, ABC Radio for years and years and years, and she would make, you know, that those things would happen to her, and you do learn that preparation is definitely very key, but sometimes shit just goes wrong, or you make a gap. Like another one that I made early on was when I was ABC Radio here at News Radio in Sydney. And it was an early morning bulletin I was reading, and I called. I don't know what I was tired. I've got no idea why, but I called Tanzania. I pronounced it Tanzania. It was mortifying. And the bosses weren't too happy with that one, let me tell you. Helen Zaremas thought it was hilarious though.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're going to get names wrong as well. And, you know, having a surname like Sekulich, you know, I actually think it's quite phonetic compared to some of the names I've learned over the years. But, you know, I always want to do that person justice. But, you know, sometimes, you know, you bungle. And, you know, as long as your intentions aren't ill, then all will be forgiven, I think. I think we live in a bit more of a forgiving world these days with the audience, but with more senior managers. Because you just hear those stories from the 90s, and I'm sure some people could definitely talk about it, or, you know, back in the day, where you just had editors throwing books at people and saying, I never want to hear this pronunciation ever again, or I wouldn't care to, you know, have you, you know, elide your T's, which is what I do. I say matter, I don't say matter, which is also another polishing technique that I had to learn along the way. Yeah.
And I'm very self-conscious when I have to do,
yeah.
It's great. Yeah.
But yeah, as long as you're, preparation's key. You know, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. But at the same time, like, yeah, you just got to kind of roll with the punches.
So unfortunately, we've only got like a couple minutes left. But just quickly from both of you, do you have any tips for students looking for a career in journalism, more specifically in audio journalism and podcasting?
Any tips? I think, well, look, for me, especially, you know, when I was restarting my career, and look, I was a little bit older and such, but I think 2SER is such a great place, and it's, you know, there's so many young people. I know there's like, I think probably a heap of you here that already volunteer at 2SER, and, you know, there's also FBI and places like that. Community stations are so, I mean, I really cut my teeth. I learned so much there. And I still, even though I've gone on to do, you know, bigger things or whatever, I still love going in and working there. Like, it's, I think community radio and I think independent media is like really important. So for me it's a joy, but sometimes it'll be the most fun you ever have because of the creativity that you've got there, and it gives you the space to make mistakes. And I know journalism, it can provide this huge offering, right? And it's like, so what do you want to do? Do you want to work in audio? Do you want to work in print or digital or television? Okay, what do you want to cover? Do you have an interest in it? You know, and if you're trying to work out those questions, because sometimes it can be really hard to decide, just, you know, places like 2SER, the great thing is you can kind of do a bit of everything, and say yes to a lot of things and find out what it is that you like and what drives you and what you enjoy doing. And it gives you a lot of opportunity in that sense. And if it is audio, then, you know, fantastic, because you will learn so much there. And the other thing I would say is network as much as you can, because I think that was a big thing for me. I think one of the most important people in my life and career was a man named Glenn Daniel, who was a newsreader in Sydney for many years. He was a newsreader for probably 40 years across Sydney. You probably would have grown up hearing him in the car with mum and dad listening to WSFM or Smooth or he was the radio newsreader there, and he helped me a lot and introduced me to my first two bosses at the ABC and then at SBS, and was an amazing mentor and gave me, you could see that I was hungry though, and I was really passionate and I wanted to learn and I wanted to get better, and so he was really generous with his time in giving me feedback on, you know, my reads and my stories, my interviews, all this sort of stuff. So I think networking is crucial, but doing it in the right way and making sure that you're utilising it in the right way, and really putting in the effort and showing that how passionate you are and that you do really want to learn. Those would be mine. Yeah.
Yeah, in my final year of uni, it was 2021 Melbourne, so we were in and out of lockdowns, and I was doing this subject that went across 2 semesters, and we were able to sort of do a big journalism piece, work on this very long form piece on whatever, and I happened to choose muscle building supplements and its increased use in young men. When I first envisioned the story, it was going to be a digital piece, and then after a while I sort of thought, oh no, I think this could work in an audio format. I had a few interesting people that I was speaking to. I was speaking to, once again, was talking to someone who had struggled with body image issues, and he was just fantastic, and I thought getting his voice is part of the story, which is big awesome. But yeah, I had to basically build a cubby house in my room where I would have blankets over my head and perched up on these chairs that I'd taken from the dining room, and so that the sound would, the blankets would buffer the pops and all that, and it was just this whole production that I went through. But I'm so glad I did it, and because of that, I was able to show that to the ABC, being I actually really care about audio, and I've managed to make this 2-part series from nothing. I really had no resources, so it's just on my own. So I'd just say, do a bit of that, just go experiment. If you've got a story in mind and you've got some people you want to talk to, or if you've got an event you want to go to, just pulling out a microphone and just recording the natural sound and weaving it in later, it's just going to sound awesome. And places like 7 AM will hire people, or as part of the application process, they'll say, do you have any podcasts, or do you have any audio series that you've worked on? We want to hear it. And often they won't look for production value. They'll look at what you've done with what you've got. And I certainly don't have the most polished voice, but I think it's because I cared and because I knew that I actually gave a damn about audio and the direction of it, that they were probably this guy might have a chance. So as long as you're showing your passion and interest and sort of channeling that into something, there's no substitute for it in my eyes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that. We might take it to the audience now, so if anyone's got any questions, maybe we can pass around the wireless mic.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Anyone got any questions? Ebony?
This one, sorry, Tina, is that right? Yeah, awesome, sorry, it slipped my mind already. This isn't necessarily related to, audio journalism and this entire topic, so apologies, but I was really interested in, you said you worked in PR, and obviously you have experience in both commercial and community, public broadcasting. I recently found heaps of interest in how many argue that some commercial journalism stories tend to sensationalise stories with, profit, more so than authenticity, etc. And I was just wondering, that's not saying that they do, but I was just wondering, has there been any crossovers between your experience in PR and some sort of more commercial pieces in journalism? It was very random, but I was very interested.
Not, I think, in the way that you might be thinking in that sense. I think there's definitely crossovers in with PR and journalism in general, in terms of they're all based around a good book and sort of getting someone's attention through a narrative. So PR and book publicity, I had to get journalists to see, or maybe craft a bit of a story for them to see where the story was that they could use to put the story out. And obviously there has to be a commercial or some sort of interest, some sort of reason for them to want to invest time into a subject or whatnot. In terms of like commercial value, commercial broadcasters and commercial media sensationalising stories. I mean, there's a really old, and you still hear it sometimes. I still hear it, and I've heard it in commercial newsrooms. If it's awful, if it bleeds, it leads. There's a, the big difference I would say working in a public broadcast with a public broadcaster compared to a commercial newsroom probably wasn't until I worked with a commercial broadcaster that I realised how many house fires and car crashes happen around in general, because there's a lot of reporting on that, which is not my favourite stuff to cover, and I would like to see less of that in commercial news bulletins. I don't think in general, if you look at the way the ABC covers a story, look, the work I've done for 10 as well, I mean, 10 is much, they have much of less of an interventionist editorial sort of regime there, I guess you could say. I would say if I look at the way 10 covers something and compare it to how the ABC does, I don't think there's not a huge difference, except that the ABC, I do tend to find that the stories are a little bit longer, so there's a little bit more time for context. They will be a little bit different. Commercial broadcasters will argue that, and 10 will definitely argue that the camera work's much more dynamic and that sort of thing, and maybe it is at times. But I don't think they overly sensationalise compared to the ABC as much as you would think. Each broadcast is a bit different, might be a different story if we were talking about Sky News or, yeah. Anyways,
Thank you.
My little book.
Anyone else?
Hello. Oh God, that's loud. I just sort of want to ask, you guys sort of touched on a lot about good and bad talent in terms of who you're interviewing. As audio journalists, and I guess journalists in general, how can you get the most out of the people that you're interviewing? I guess broadly, but also in the context of audio journalism, because obviously the more expressive they are and the more sort of into the topic they are, the better it's going to be for you and also for the audience. Did that make sense?
Yeah, no.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I don't want to choke you.
No, you're fine.
Is that on?
It's just much quieter than the other.
Yeah, do you want this one?
As long as you guys can hear me, that's alright. I was reading like an old some esteemed journalist was talking about this and saying that they had an editor that they would go to and they would say like, oh, that guy was like shit. Like, what are you gonna do? And the editor would be like, well, that's not good. Like, you're just gonna have to squeeze the life out of whatever you've got. And I think there's just such truth to that, because you really can't reach the way that some people are going to be. Some people, I've had some interviews lined up in my time where I've been like so excited to talk to that person, and I've just been like, oh, they're just going to have such good things to say, and they'll just be really exciting. And then you're just so heavily disappointed afterwards. You're like, oh gosh, they were actually like really, really dull. And so, yeah, I think as long as you put them at ease the best you can, talk about the weather, talk about the day that they've had, what they had for lunch. That's my go-to. If I'm checking their levels, I'll just be like, oh, can you just tell me about like what you've had for breakfast? And, if they say something, that they've eaten that I've eaten, I've just been like, yes, all right, we're on friend. But if they've eaten something that I find foul, I will let them know as well, and I'll be like, I'm not being controversial here, but I hate granola. You just kind of do what you can, just to put them at ease and to, make them feel like the pressure is not on. Because I think people do actually surprisingly stumble when they feel like there's a lot of eyes on them when, it's just meant to be a chat between two people. So yeah, as long as you sort of keep that in mind. There's also there's a really good example I can think of from Sarah Ferguson when she did the Killing season. And she was talking about the different experiences in having Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard interviewed. She said that Kevin was really tricky because he wanted to establish rapport. He really wanted to be your best friend because he was out of blood and he wanted you on his side. Whereas Julia was far more reserved and didn't, just the relationship just wasn't happening between the two of them, and she did everything she could to try to find some common ground with Julia, and it just wasn't working. But I remember her saying, like, the trick is you've got to do your best, but you can only go so far. You can't force it either. So if someone's really just not comfortable that day, you just got to, do what you can with, the personalities we've got, because that's all you can do, I guess. That's my idea.
What's your issue with granola?
It's just popping out.
No.
Muesli as well.
Oh, no. Okay.
We can take this out.
We could take yeah, we'll chat about this afterwards. But that's a great example, actually, and a really great series, The Killing season, and really interesting listening to Sarah Ferguson's interviews about doing that series and producing that after the fact, because it's, if you are really interested in interviews and interviewing, and that's really, that's a really interesting example, and the stories that she's got to tell from making that were fascinating, and the psychology of people. And that's the thing, that reminded me of, Kevin Rudd, someone that wants to build rapport and wants to sort of disarm you. There are people, I had someone like that not long ago who, on 4th Estate, and who was really, I think, trying to, I was ready to, I was not too impressed with the piece of reporting that they had done on this issue, and I was really ready to sort of take them to task a little bit. And he did this thing where he was so reasonable and so charming and affable that it made you feel like you were being very unreasonable to think he was quite slippery, and he's someone that's quite a firebrand in the Australian media. I'm not going to specify who this is, but I just remember walking away going, he just did me. He just got he just completely, and that can happen. And then you've got other times where I had other talent who I know are brilliant, but who take a while to warm up, and that can be fine if you're field reporting, because sometimes you're asking them these questions and it's sounding really dull, and it's sounding a bit dry and it's a bit dull. Then they start to warm up, and you're getting them on a roll, and you can feel it. You can feel when the rapport is good, and then you can always circle back to the earlier questions if you want, once they're a bit loosened up. I do think rapport building is essential, and if you become a field reporter, like some of the work I was doing in the regions, that's really essential, especially people from regional towns and smaller communities. Building rapport with them, because they can smell a phony from a mile away. And I still remember this woman looking at me the first time I came onto her farm, and she went, "You've never been on a farm before, have you, love?" I just went, look, no, I'm from the city. I had, but I just went along with it, and I was like, no, but I'm in your hands, and I'm kind of, take me along with you, because I've got no idea what I'm doing. And she ended up opening up to me completely, because I didn't sort of come in pretending like I knew everything, and I sort of fell on my own sword a bit and going, I'm a little bit of a fish out of water here, like I didn't grow up on a farm. And then there'll be other times, and I have this all the time with 4th Estate, where, especially doing the In Profile series, there was one such I had on not long ago, who's very good at turning on the warmth and the affability when the mic comes on. But off air, I found them very tricky to build rapport with, and a little bit arm's length, and had little funny ways of moving me along when they didn't want to you know, like sort of stay on an issue, or and that can sometimes be really tricky, and it can be really offsetting to your rhythm and the rhythm of how your interview or the story that you're telling. That can be really quite off-putting. It can throw you, but I think not taking it too personally, because that's something, and you will do that early on. You'll kind of go, why are they reacting to me like this, or this isn't quite going the way I'm sort of giving into it a little bit, but still sticking with where you sort of want it to go, but not getting too frustrated by it, because if you kind of relax a little bit into it, they might relax, they might not, but you'll still, there's only so much you can do. And if you get really frustrated with it, it's the end product is going to be not so good, you know, so that would be my advice.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you guys today. But on behalf of all of us and UTS and Central News, thank you very much for coming. I'm sure we've all learnt a lot. Please stick around. We've got some pizza, a few drinks, and I'm sure any of you students who want to come up to talk to Tina and Harry and ask them some questions, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to do so.